I watched a space marine eat a man's memories. Not metaphorically. I mean, I stood 3 meters away and watched as Brother Sergeant Castaman of the Blood Ravens placed his gauntlet hand on a dying heretic's skull, bit into the traitor's flesh, and consumed his secrets along with his blood. The screaming stopped after the first bite. The visions started after the second. And by the third, I understood why the Imperium classifies the Imophagia implant as a strategic asset rather than a biological augmentation. My name is Scriptor Hadrian Vex, and for 12 years I have served as a remembrancer attached to the 3rd Company of the Blood Ravens chapter. My job is to document their deeds, preserve their victories for the archives of Mars, and occasionally bear witness to things that make me question whether the Emperor's angels are salvation or damnation wrapped in ceramite. I'm going to tell you what I saw on the dead world of Cronus Tertius. Not the sanitized version that appears in the official chronicles. Not the propaganda the ecclesiarchy broadcasts to inspire faith in the common masses. The truth. The kind of truth that gets remembrancers reassigned to cataloging supply manifests on frozen fortress worlds where no one will ever hear them speak again. But before I tell you what happened on Cronus, you need to understand what a space marine actually is. Not the heroic image from the recruitment posters. Not the godlike warriors from the ballads sung in cathedral squares. I mean, what they really are, down in the genetic code and the psychoconditioning and the 17 surgically implanted organs that transform boys into weapons. Because here's what nobody tells you about space marines. They're not human anymore. They were once, maybe. Most of them were children when the chapter found them. Boys pulled from feral worlds or hive gangs or death worlds where simply surviving to adolescence proved you had something worth cultivating. But the moment the apothecarian begins the transformation process, the moment they implant the first gene seed and start flooding a child's body with hormones and genetic instructions written by the Emperor himself 10,000 years ago, that child stops being human and starts becoming something else entirely. I've read the biological specifications. I've watched the surgical procedures when the apothecaries permitted it. I've seen what happens to a human body when you give it 2 hearts, 3 lungs, and a brain that processes information faster than most cogitators. The Astartes can spit acid that melts through steel. They can hibernate for centuries and wake without degradation. They can survive in the vacuum of space for limited periods. They can eat almost anything organic and extract nutrients from it. They can breathe water if they need to. Their blood clots almost instantly. Their bones are harder than the armor they wear. And perhaps most terrifying of all, they can learn through consumption, absorbing the memories and skills of anything they devour through an organ called the imophagia. But the physical transformations are just the foundation. The real horror or miracle, depending on your perspective, is the conditioning. The hypnotherapy and psychoindoctrination that shapes their minds into weapons as surely as the gene seed shapes their bodies. They are programmed, and I use that word deliberately, to feel no fear, to know no doubt, to process everything through a filter of tactical necessity and strategic value. Love, mercy, compassion, all the things that make us human are systematically identified and repurposed or eliminated entirely. Not because the Imperium is cruel, but because a warrior who hesitates because he feels pity for an enemy is a warrior who fails. And Space Marines do not fail. I thought I understood this. I had spent 12 years observing them, documenting their campaigns, watching them fight and kill and die with a detachment that seemed almost mechanical. I had seen Brother Thaddeus continue fighting for 6 minutes after losing both legs below the knee, dragging himself forward on his hands while reciting litanies of hate until he could reach an enemy position and detonate his remaining grenades. I had seen Scout Aximand walk into a burning Prometheum storage facility to retrieve a chapter banner, emerging with 90% burns across his body, the skin sloughing off his hands as he presented the sacred cloth to his captain before finally collapsing. I had seen these things and told myself I comprehended what the Astartes were. I was wrong. Cronus Tertius was supposed to be a minor operation. The world had been compliant for 600 years. A mining colony that extracted adamantium ore from deep shaft mines and shipped it to forge worlds throughout the sector. Population of 4 million, mostly indentured laborers working generations-long contracts that bound entire families to the mineral rights corporations. Unremarkable in every way except one. 3 months before we arrived, the tithe stopped. Not reduced, not delayed. Stopped. Completely and without explanation. The administratum sent investigators. They didn't return. The Imperial Guard sent a reconnaissance company. They sent back a single Vox transmission that consisted of screaming and what sounded like chanting in a language that made the comm operators vomit blood. Then silence. So they sent the Space Marines. Third company deployed with 120 warriors, which tells you how seriously command was taking the threat. Most compliance actions require a squad, maybe 2. 120 Astartes meant someone expected serious resistance. We made planetfall in drop pods, screaming through the atmosphere in armored coffins that hit the ground hard enough to crater rock creep. I rode in a Thunderhawk with the command squad, which was marginally less traumatic but still involved enough G-forces to make my nose bleed and my vision swim. The capital city was called Throne's Gift, which someone had clearly named before they understood irony. It should have held 2 million people. When we arrived, it held none. The streets were empty, the buildings intact, power still flowing through the grid, lumens burning in windows, machinery humbling in distant factories. But no people, not hiding, not fled, just gone as if the entire population had been raptured up to the Emperor's side, leaving behind only their possessions and the faint smell of something wrong that made even my unaugmented senses twitch with unease. Captain Aurelius, who commanded Third Company, ordered tactical dispersal. Squads spread throughout the city in search patterns designed by minds that understood warfare on a level I would never reach. I stayed with the command squad because Captain Aurelius had decided I needed to observe this operation closely. He never explained why, but I learned over time that when a Space Marine makes a decision like that, it means they know something you don't, and you're about to wish you didn't know it either. We found the first body in what had been a residential district. A woman, maybe 30 standard years old, lying in the street with no visible wounds. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, and her mouth was frozen in an expression that I initially thought was fear. Brother Apothecary Marius examined her with instruments that scanned for toxins, pathogens, and warp corruption. He found nothing, no cause of death, no sign of violence. She had simply stopped living, as if someone had reached into her chest and turned off a switch. We found 6,000 more bodies in the next 4 hours. Men, women, children, all of them arranged in rough geometric patterns that suggested deliberate placement. They formed shapes when viewed from above, symbols that Brother Librarian Azariah identified as belonging to a Xeno species the Ordo Xenos had classified as extinct for 8,000 years. The Hrud, he called them, entropy-made flesh, creatures that moved through time differently than we did, aging everything around them to dust while they remained unchanged. Captain Aurelius ordered immediate Vox contact with the battle barge in orbit, requesting orbital bombardment coordinates and evacuation protocols. The response came back corrupted, every third word replaced with clicking sounds that hurt to hear. We were cut off. That's when the Hrud came. They didn't attack. That would imply aggression, intention, the kind of comprehensible hostility that soldiers can respond to. They simply existed near us, and existing near them meant dying. I watched Brother Severus age 40 years in 10 seconds, his ceramite armor rusting and cracking, his skin going from pale to gray to translucent as decades of decay compressed into moments. He didn't scream. Space Marines don't. He simply looked at Captain Aurelius and reported his status in a voice that cracked with age he shouldn't have possessed. then collapsed as his hearts, both of them, gave out simultaneously. The Astartes responded with a precision that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrible. They didn't panic. They didn't retreat. They adapted. Captain Aurelius designated Brother Librarian Azariah as primary response, authorizing the use of psychic powers that the Codex Astartes explicitly forbids in urban environments due to the risk of collateral damage. Azariah didn't hesitate. He opened his mind to the warp and pulled out fire that burned cold, freezing time itself around the Hrud, locking them in stasis fields that screamed against the laws of reality but held long enough for the tactical squads to maneuver into overlapping fire positions. What happened next lasted 93 seconds. I know because I counted, timing each moment against my own heartbeat as if that rhythm could anchor me to sanity while everything around me fell apart. The Space Marines killed approximately 200 Hrud with bolter fire, melta weapons, and in several cases their bare hands, physically tearing apart creatures that existed partially out of phase with standard spacetime. I watched Brother Sergeant Castaman grab a Hrud by what I think was its head and crush it with grip strength that made the creature's equivalent of bones powder even as his gauntlet aged and fell apart around his hand. They were magnificent. They were horrifying. They were exactly what the Emperor designed them to be. But 93 seconds of fighting Hrud cost 3rd Company 47 warriors. Nearly half the force gone. Not wounded, not incapacitated. Dead. Aged to dust or phased out of reality or simply erased from existence in ways that left no bodies to recover. I had seen Space Marines fight orcs and Tyranids and traitor legions. I had never seen them lose nearly half their force in 93 seconds. Captain Aurelius ordered immediate withdrawal to a defensive position in what had been a cathedral to the God Emperor. The building's blessed architecture seemed to provide some protection from the Hrud's temporal distortions, or maybe the sheer weight of faith accumulated over 600 years of worship created a barrier they couldn't easily cross. Either way, we fortified and waited for extraction while Brother Librarian Azariah attempted to re-establish Vox contact with the fleet. That's when I asked Captain Aurelius the question that had been building in my mind since we found the first body. I asked him if we were going to die here. He looked at me with eyes that held no fear, no doubt, no uncertainty at all. And he said something I will never forget. He said, "Death is irrelevant. The mission is all that matters. Not we will survive. Not we will fight to the last." Just a simple statement of fact delivered with the same inflection he might use to comment on the weather. Death was irrelevant. The mission was all that matters. And I understood then what I had failed to understand in 12 years of observation. Space Marines aren't human because they don't value life the way humans do. Not even their own lives. They are weapons, tools forged for a singular purpose, and a weapon doesn't fear breaking if breaking accomplishes the objective. They had been programmed, trained, conditioned, and genetically modified to exist beyond fear, beyond self-preservation, beyond every instinct that keeps humans alive. They were perfect soldiers because they had no concept of survival divorced from victory. We held that cathedral for 18 hours against Hrud attacks that came in waves, each one costing us more warriors, each one aged to dust or erased from time. I watched Brother Sergeant Castaman coordinate fire teams with a precision that never wavered even as the warriors under his command died around him. I watched Brother Apothecary Marius harvest gene seed from fallen brothers with hands that shook not from fear but from the early stages of temporal corruption that was eating through his augmented biology. I watched Captain Aurelius stand at the cathedral's entrance, his power sword crackling with energy, cutting down Hrud that got too close while reciting litanies to the Emperor in a voice that never rose above a conversational tone. They were dying. They knew they were dying. And they didn't care. Brother Librarian Azariah finally made contact with the fleet on hour 16. The transmission was brief and corrupted by warp interference, but we understood enough. A strike cruiser was inbound with reinforcements and would make planetfall in approximately 2 hours. We just had to survive until then. The HRUD must have understood this too, because they changed tactics. Instead of the probing attacks we'd been repelling, they committed everything. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, flooding toward the cathedral in a tide of entropy and temporal distortion that made the air shimmer and twist. I felt my hair turning gray, felt my joints aching with arthritis I was too young to have, felt the first whispers of the age that was trying to claim me. The Space Marines opened fire. I cannot adequately describe what I witnessed. The bolter rounds alone would have been impressive, mass-reactive shells detonating inside Xeno's flesh with precision that turned each shot into a kill. But the Astartes were using everything. Flammers that turned HRUD to ash. Plasma weapons that burned so hot they left glowing craters in the ground. Heavy bolters that roared like angry gods. And through it all, Captain Aurelius stood at the center of the formation, calling out target priorities and tactical adjustments with the calm efficiency of someone organizing a filing system rather than conducting a desperate last stand. We lost another 31 warriors in those final 2 hours. Brother Librarian Azariah burned himself out, generating psychic barriers that kept the HRUD from simply phasing through the cathedral walls. Brother Apothecary Marius aged 90 years in the span of minutes, continuing to treat wounded warriors even as his hands became so gnarled with arthritis he could barely hold his instruments. By the time the strike cruiser arrived and drop pods began hammering into the ground around us, 3rd Company had been reduced to 42 warriors from the original 120. The reinforcements were from 1st Company, the veteran warriors who wore Terminator armor and carried weapons that lesser chapters would consider holy relics. They swept through the remaining HRUD with an efficiency that made our desperate defense look almost amateurish. Within 20 minutes, the Xenos were either dead or fled back into whatever temporal holes they had crawled out of. Captain Aurelius reported to the company commander, who arrived with the reinforcements. His report was brief, factual, delivered without emotion or embellishment. He listed casualties, ammunition expenditure, and tactical observations. He did not mention that he had just lost 2/3 of his company. He did not mention the 18 hours of fighting against an enemy that could age you to death with their mere presence. He simply reported that the mission had been accomplished, the HRUD threat had been identified and contained, and 3rd Company was ready for reassignment once they received replacement warriors and re-equipped. I realized then that this was normal for them. This level of loss, this scale of horror, this was just another operation. Another day in the service of the Emperor. They would mourn their fallen brothers in their own way, recover the gene seed so that new warriors could be created, and move on to the next battlefield without pause or hesitation, because that's what weapons do. They fulfill their function until they break, and then they're replaced with new weapons that fulfill the same function. But here's what haunts me about that day on Cronus Tertius. Here's the thing I can't reconcile even years later, after I was reassigned to less sensitive duties for reasons that were never officially explained. It's not the death. It's not the horror. It's not even the casual way the Space Marines processed catastrophic casualties as simple tactical setbacks. It's what happened after the battle, when we were loading the dead onto recovery Thunderhawks and I saw Brother Sergeant Castaman standing over the body of a scout who had died early in the fighting. The scout was young, maybe 16 or 17 standard years, barely into his transformation into a full Astartes. He had been killed by temporal acceleration, aged 80 years in seconds, his body withered and ancient. I saw Castaman kneel beside the body. I saw him remove his helmet, revealing a face that could have been carved from marble, perfect and terrible in its inhuman beauty. And I saw him lean down and bite into the scout's flesh, activating his homophagia, consuming the boy's memories along with his genetic material. It's a sacred practice among the Astartes. By eating their fallen brothers, they preserve memories and experiences that might otherwise be lost. The Amophagia lets them literally absorb knowledge through consumption. The strategic, efficient, a way to ensure that lessons learned in combat aren't wasted when warriors die. But watching Castaman consume that boy's memories, I saw something flicker across his face. Just for a moment, barely a second, his expression changed. It wasn't grief. Space Marines don't grieve the way humans do. It wasn't sadness. It was something else, something I couldn't name. Recognition maybe, or remembrance. A ghost of the human boy he had once been, flickering to life for just long enough to acknowledge the human boy this scout had been before the transformation began. Then it was gone. Castaman stood, replaced his helmet, and walked away to attend to other duties. The moment passed as if it had never happened. But I saw it, and I understood something that the propaganda never tells you, that the recruitment posters carefully omit, that even most Imperial citizens never consider. Space Marines aren't born as perfect warriors. They're made, and the making requires taking boys, children really, and systematically destroying everything that makes them human, replacing it piece by piece with genetic enhancements and psychological conditioning and cybernetic implants until what remains is something that can fight without fear and kill without hesitation and die without regret. The process is necessary. I understand that. The galaxy is so hostile, so filled with threats that want to exterminate humanity, that we need warriors who transcend human limitations. We need soldiers who can hold the line against orcs and tyranids and chaos marines and all the other nightmares that wait in the dark. We need the Astartes. But what haunts me, what keeps me awake on the nights when I can't stop thinking about Cronus Tertius, is the question of cost. Not the tactical cost, not the strategic calculus of lives spent versus objectives achieved. The cost to the boys who become Space Marines. The cost of taking a child and killing everything soft and vulnerable and human about him, burning it all away until what remains is hard and lethal and perfect. Because here's what nobody tells you about Space Marines. They're not just weapons, they're tragedies. Every single one of them represents a boy who will never grow into a man, who will never fall in love or raise children or grow old surrounded by family. They're frozen at the moment of their transformation, locked into a state of perpetual adolescence where they will serve and fight and eventually die without ever experiencing most of the things that make human life worth living. And they don't mourn this loss because they can't. The conditioning won't allow it. They are content with their fate because they've been programmed to be content. Their neurons literally rewired to find satisfaction in combat and brotherhood and service to the Emperor. They are happy because they've been made incapable of imagining any other form of happiness. Is that salvation or damnation? I honestly don't know. I think about the scout that Castaman ate the memories of. I think about what that boy's life might have been if the chapter hadn't found him. If he'd been allowed to remain fully human. Maybe he would have been a laborer or a merchant or a soldier in the Imperial Guard. Maybe he would have died young anyway in any of the 1,000 ways that Imperial citizens die. Or maybe he would have lived a long life, unremarkable but human, experiencing joy and sorrow and love and all the messy, complicated emotions that Space Marines are trained to suppress. We'll never know because the Astartes needed warriors and he had the genetic markers that made him compatible with gene seed implantation, and so he was taken and transformed and killed before he turned 17. His brief existence as a Space Marine lasting maybe 2 years before temporal acceleration aged him to death on a mining world no one will remember. That's what Space Marines really are. They're the price we pay for survival. Not just in terms of their service, but in terms of what we destroy to create them. Every Space Marine is a human life sacrificed, not in battle but in creation, transformed into something that can fight and kill and die for the Imperium without ever questioning whether it's worth it. And maybe it is worth it. Maybe the calculus works out. Maybe the existence of the Astartes, with all their terrible efficiency and transhuman capability, is what stands between humanity and extinction. Maybe we need to sacrifice boys to create warriors, to burn away everything human to forge something superhuman. But I watched Third Company lose 78 warriors on Cronus Tertius, and I keep thinking about the fact that each of those deaths represented 2 losses. The Space Marine who died fighting Hrud, and the boy who died years earlier in an apothecarian, transformed into that Space Marine through a process that killed him just as surely as any Xeno's weapon, just more slowly and with religious ceremony. I think about Captain Aurelius saying death is irrelevant, the mission is all that matters. I think about how that's literally true for him, how he's been conditioned to believe it on a level deeper than conscious thought, how his neural pathways have been reshaped to make it impossible for him to value individual survival over strategic objectives. And I wonder if that's the most terrifying thing about Space Marines. Not their strength or their weapons or their transhuman biology. Not even their tactical prowess or their fearlessness in combat. The most terrifying thing is that they're victims masquerading as heroes, boys who were sacrificed to create weapons that don't even understand they've been sacrificed, trapped in bodies and minds that were engineered to make them incapable of recognizing their own tragedy. They are necessary. They are glorious. They are the Emperor's finest warriors, and without them humanity would have fallen millennia ago. But they are also, every single one of them, a monument to the price we're willing to pay for survival. And that price is measured not in currency or resources, but in the destroyed humanity of boys who never got the chance to become men. I saw Brother Sergeant Castaman eat his fallen brother's memories on Cronus Tertius. I saw that flicker of recognition, that ghost of humanity, surface for just a moment before being suppressed by conditioning and duty. And I understood that somewhere inside that transhuman warrior, buried beneath 17 implanted organs and years of psycho-indoctrination and a brain rewired for warfare, there was still a boy, or the memory of a boy, or the ghost of what a boy might have become if the Imperium hadn't needed another weapon. That's what Space Marines really are. They're not angels or gods or even just soldiers. They're the ultimate expression of the Imperium's fundamental bargain. Give us your children, and we'll transform them into weapons that can keep you safe. Give us their humanity, and we'll return warriors who can fight without fear or doubt or mercy. Give us everything that makes them human, and we'll give you back something that can stand between you and the infinite horrors of the galaxy. And we accept this bargain because the alternative is extinction. Because the galaxy is so hostile and so cruel that we need warriors who can fight without flinching, who can die without regret, who can commit any atrocity in service of humanity's survival without pause or doubt. The Space Marines are necessary. They are glorious. They are exactly what the Emperor designed them to be. And that, more than anything else, is what makes them truly terrifying. Not because they're monsters, but because they're the price we agreed to pay, and we've been paying it for 10,000 years, one boy at a time, transformed and trained and sent out to die for an Imperium that will never stop needing more warriors to feed into its endless wars. I am Scriptor Hadrian Vex, and I served with the Blood Ravens for 12 years before my reassignment. I documented their victories and recorded their deeds for the archives of Mars. And I learned that the greatest horror of the Imperium isn't the Xenos or the heretics or the demons that claw at reality's edges. It's that we're all complicit. Every citizen who cheers when the Astartes arrive. Every parent who gives up their son to the chapter recruitment teams. Every Imperial commander who calls for Space Marine intervention knowing what those warriors really are and what they cost. We're all complicit in the sacrifice of boys to create weapons. And we call it glory.